So thank you for that, filmmakers. I'm Amy Bass. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you to IPK for loving the beautiful game. And I'm so excited to be here with Kim and with Courtney to talk about something that we don't always talk about. We talk a lot about players and athletes and Title IX and how it's brought women's sports to this really exciting arena in the United States. But there's a lot behind the scenes, and coaching is such an important part of that. And one of the things that Title IX actually did, before Title IX, 90% of women's sports in the United States were coached by women. And Title IX made money pour into women's sports. And guess who followed the money that went into women's sports? Male coaches, and they got hired. And so now we're at about 40% of women's teams being coached by women, and even fewer in terms of what our friend Kim here does, Kim being the only woman coaching a men's NCAA soccer team. Yeah, absolutely.
Huge.
So Kim, let me start with you, because again, we look at the impact of Title IX on the athlete, and we don't often talk about it in terms of the coach or the AD, which those numbers I'm not even going to get into today. But Tracy said something kind of interesting. She said that, the role of the female athlete, and we have certainly celebrated female athletes and we have stars, but you play and you go to college and you play and then you start your life, right? There's sort of that line of demarcation. And for her, for you, that isn't where life started. You kept going with that. Can you talk, because you were a member of the inaugural women's national team in the U.S. Like, you were a badass goalkeeper.
The goalie, you started it all.
Yeah. So, your stats are too impressive to go into. We Google her. But can you talk about that transition from player into coaching?
Very much, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Eric, for having me. I have always been at the right place at the right time. That's the best way I can describe it. I am a positive product, I think, of the Title IX movement, because when I was in high school, there was a guy named Carlos who started the girls' soccer team at my high school. I'd never played soccer before. I'd played every other sport. And he was going around to the girls in the school, digging up enough players to create the first soccer team in my high school. And when I look back on that, that was about 1980, 1981. And so I don't know this to be for sure, but I think that movement was a result of the Title IX that was passed in 1972. So lo and behold, I go out for the soccer team. It turns out to be my best sport. I also benefited from Title IX again because I was the first wave of girls playing soccer in college. So I received a scholarship to attend the University of Central Florida. I'd never thought about going to college. And so I end up in college, and then the Soccer Federation decides to start the first women's national team in 1985. I was good. I was having success in college. I definitely had talent. And then the next thing I know, I'm on the women's national team. So it's like
recording the first shutout in women's national team history, yes?
The first win, played in the first game. So my life has been really amazing when it comes to the sport of soccer and how much it has meant to me and how much it has given me.
Do you see that same line of demarcation that Tracy talked about, that you stopped playing and then what? How did you make that leap into the then what was going to be coach?
Right. So I was born to be an athlete. That's really what I was born to be. I just wanted to play sports. That's where you could find me, just out playing with the boys, this, that, everything. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a Miami Dolphins wide receiver. I grew up in Miami. The Dolphins were legendary in the 70s, and that's what I wanted to do. And then, of course, I grew up, and I realized that being a professional athlete for a woman at that time was not really realistic unless I was a tennis player. And then I always told my mom, you should have just let me play tennis, because I could have made a pretty good living as a tennis player. So I actually went into the workforce. I went to get a 9-to-5 job. Even though I loved soccer, I loved playing, I just wanted to get up every day and be a professional soccer player. But that wasn't reality. I needed to drive a car, I had to have car insurance, I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to do all the things that adults do. So I did go into the workforce. And after 3 years of being in a 9-to-5 job, I hated it. Hated it. I was still pursuing my soccer career. I was still playing on the national team. And I just said, I am going to make soccer my profession. I love this. I hate what I'm doing. And so I went out and I started coaching. I started running clinics. I started running my own soccer camps. And that's what I did. I just went out and I made it my business. And here I am.
And here you are. We all hate 9-to-5 jobs too, because we're here on a Thursday in the afternoon. So Courtney, what struck you about Tracy Hamm's story?
Tracy Hamm's story is universal, and we have so many things that we see in her experience that relate to our own experience, whether it's in our profession or in the sport that we were playing ourselves. When I was originally going to do the documentary, I was trying to really just kind of profile, like give somebody, what does it look like to be in this position as the only female in this setting where you are required to have a heightened level of everything, a heightened level of professionalization, a heightened level of don't get anything wrong, a heightened level of, as the only woman there, it's like if she fails, the whole gender fails. You know, that feeling where there's a lot of weight on it. And when it came back, when the guys came back from Wales, I was like, this movie's not done, because no one's going to go into coaching after seeing that, right? So echoing what Kim just said, she made her own decision to make coaching her path. And Tracy took what she learned there in Wales, and she did what she needed to do with it to make it her own, and building her own culture and her own community in San Francisco, where she's coaching. And I wanted to bring a sense of that here to show people, when all these other kind of invisible barriers of, well, why aren't women going into coaching? We have these national team players that we love to watch, and they're incredibly successful on the world stage, and we get really excited every 4 years. And then it's like we're not translating that into seeing the athlete ascend to a position of power and authority in the sport, whether it's commissioner of the NWSL, or owning a franchise, or becoming an AD, or different routes to staying in the game that aren't necessarily coaching. But if this is where your passion is, like, we want all women to stay in some level of participation in supporting sports. So my own experience in coaching, when I first came to New York, I was an assistant director of coaching in Manhattan. And I tried to bring a little bit of California to New York. And about 12,000 emails in, where I'm like, okay, this is like 3 cents per writing this email. Like, what is going on here? So I had to take a step away from coaching, and the sports psychology hat came on. What am I seeing? I'm seeing robotic players. I'm seeing trainings where there's no joy, there's no communication, there's no laughter, there's no jaga bonita. And that's what's going to be replicated in our national teams if we don't step in.
So but there's indignities that accompany that, right? So you were saying, if people get to the film and we end in Wales, then no one's ever going to want to be a coach. So you need sort of the inspirational soaring part of how do we change that. Can you talk, hi Greg Lawless, can you talk a little bit about the day-to-day on the field with some of the things? Because I'm thinking about, the NBA just rolled out this promise, right? 50% of all officials coming into the league are going to be women. And there was sort of that kind of passive-aggressive, because, being an official, there's no benefit of being a man, as opposed to being a coach where there might be, which is an interesting thing for them to have said, because they're also trying to push in terms of initiatives for women to be coaches. But, kinds of the stuff that they were all talking about, Kim, that they go to your assistant if your assistant's male, or they call you mom, or, they ask for lineups from somebody other than you, or they just don't call you coach. Can you talk a little bit about that day-to-day experience and what you've encountered, bad and good, beyond sort of the mansplaining stuff that we saw Tracy encountering?
Yeah. Luckily for me, when I was first announced as the coach here at NYU, and this is one place that you can have female leadership, right? NYU, it's ahead of the curve, the greatest city in the world, very liberal, progressive. I received a massive amount of outpouring from people I'd never met. Messages were hitting my inbox here at NYU from complete strangers. This is the greatest thing. It's about time. I received a lot of positive messages from coaches, colleagues in the field, and in my conference. And luckily, I have never experienced, since I took over the job here at NYU on the men's side, I've never experienced what I would consider to be like outright sexism or a sexist remark or something that would go, whoa. I've done a few interviews where more than once I've been asked about what it's like to go in the locker room, and they're fixated on this idea of me being in the locker room, which I just find
They're
absurd.
fixated on sports writers being in the locker room too.
Absurd. And I'm thinking, here's a professional that I'm talking to. What's it like for when a male goes into a female locker room? That's pretty much my answer. That's how I handle it. Same way. So the only other experience that I've had that's sort of been an eye-opener for me was I was coaching the NYU men's team. We were up in Rochester playing a very competitive match in a conference game, and I felt that the referee made a bad call, awarding the other team a penalty kick in a very crucial part of the match, and I was very upset on the sideline. And so I asked the referee to come over and speak to me after the penalty kick was converted. And I told him, I said, that was a bad call. That was atrocious. You ruined the fucking game. And he gave me a red card. And I walked out of there and I thought, I wonder if I was a male, I wonder if that would have been a different reaction. I just said, you ruined the fucking game. I didn't say something that was over the top, I thought. And so that was kind of a moment that I thought, well, I wonder if that happened because
it wasn't a feminine way of reacting to a bad call. It was straight red.
Straight red.
Where's the yellow?
Straight red.
Yeah.
What context do your players put things? I mean, is this just something you guys do not talk about, or do you think about your relationship with them? Do you think they think about it? That they're the only players in the NCAA coached by a woman.
I think they definitely think about it, but we never talk about it. And I've never brought it up. In fact, when for those of you who don't know, I stepped into the position when the former coach here at NYU resigned one game into the 2015 season. There was a family emergency. He had to depart the team. So the university needed a coach, and I was already on staff here. So I was a known entity. When I met the team, I said to the team, I said, we all find ourselves here in a very unusual position. And I wasn't talking about the fact that I was a female coaching men. I was talking about, and I said to them, I've never taken over a team one game into the season. And I can only imagine how you feel as the player. Now you've lost your coach, a person that you've been recruited by or you've played for. And so that was my objective, was just to help this team that was in a crisis in that moment. And I really, if parents want to talk about the fact that I'm a female, and I do have moms of players that I'm recruiting that will take me aside, and she'll say, "This is so great what you're doing." And I've had that, but I'm a female coach coaching men, and what I say is, I don't think I should be given extra credit for that, but I also don't want to be held to a double standard.
Well, and maybe both of you can talk a little bit about it. Maybe you want to put your sports psychologist hat on for this, about recruitment a little bit more, because an awful lot of a coach's year is not on the pitch, on the sidelines, or at practice or what have you, but getting the team together, right? And Tracy, obviously is someone who likes to look at a tactics board and move stuff around. So do you think that recruitment, that's your front line talking to folks? So moms might pull you aside. You're sort of redefining what soccer mom maybe means for some of them. But can you both talk a little bit about recruitment and the gender dynamic there?
Go ahead, you can start.
I think for one thing that I'm really excited about with Kim's position is what I hear in this is, we need you to help put out this fire, right? And she took the fire and she put it out. And then she got to the business of coaching and normalized her role. The recruiting part, helping normalize that it's the sport. That once those parents are across from Kim and the knowledge of the game and what she could do, what NYU could do for their son by playing in this environment and being a part of this team, gender disappears. And if it doesn't, that's not the family that's going to support the culture that's already been established by NYU. And so those aren't easy conversations to have when you're across from a family that can't get past that part. But for coaches who've been in the game and also have so much playing experience, once you start just talking about the sport, it just becomes about the sport.
So the game itself, you have the advantage of the ball, right? That once you're talking about soccer, you're talking about soccer?
That's correct. A lot of people have asked me what's the difference coaching men versus women. And my answer is that the men's game just moves faster. The game is the same. The size of the field is exactly the same. The soccer ball is the same size. You got the same number of players on the field. There's no difference, one gender versus the other. The men's game moves faster.
You've both worked with youth leagues, youth teams. Soccer is the most popular sport that American youth is playing today, second only to China in the world in terms of how many kids are playing. This stuff trickles down. I mean, my daughter's 12. She's retiring at the end of this season. She's never had a female leader, a female leader other than the logistics person on the team, right? Coach and assistant coach are the dads. They're the ones who get to be on the field. And the mom is the one who makes sure the snack is there, that everyone has a mouth guard, and, logistics of directions. There's only one male coaching U13 and under, right? I live in a soccer crazy place. So how does this trickle down, and how do we change that? How do we change soccer mom from the transportation chauffeur person to the person on the sideline yelling out strategies?
Get her a license.
Let's talk about that, because that's what Tracy decides to do.
Maybe she doesn't know she can, because it's the information you have to go and. Unfortunately, we're still in the position where if you want to be able to do it, you have to do it for yourself, right? And so maybe she doesn't even know these licenses are out there for her to engage in this. And so the U.S. Soccer's new access to coaching, it starts with a grassroots license, and that soccer mom could do it online in a weekend and then start giving some feedback to some of the coaches that she's like, no. But
that's logistics. There's a culture too, right? So Kim, you want to talk a little bit about the culture of that?
I can sort of speak to this personally because I live in a suburb out here. My daughters are 11 and 13, and I actually volunteered with the soccer club that they were playing in when they were younger, and I signed up on the sheet, volunteer, and all of that they have to go through, and nobody ever called me.
Well, why would they want you?
And so I do think it speaks to the actual culture. The culture of men coaching youth sports has been well established for many, many years. And it's going to take time to change. There's no question about it. It's just going to take time. I do believe, though, that soccer clubs, in fact, across the board, everybody could do a better job of actually seeking out qualified female leadership, because it's out there. I have children now, and so I'm a qualified person to work with my children in the soccer club. I'm much more qualified than the soccer dad that they put in charge, who's a great guy, but is not anywhere nearly qualified as I am. And so there are other people like me out there, players that have played in college, that have this great background. And I do think that it's going to take the leadership of the boards and the organizations to actually seek that out and give them permission and let them take these roles. So it also comes down to the boards and the leaders.
I do want to leave time to open it up for some Q&A with the audience, but we're talking Women's World Cup all day today, and every panel is going to touch on it, but we have you both here. Kim, you played on that first national team. I don't want to do a then and now, how far have we come, but what are you looking forward to in terms of what's right around the corner with the Women's World Cup?
Well, I'm a fan now, and I was in Vancouver for the World Cup. I'm going to France. I have my matches all planned out. I have the draw, what teams I think are going through, where they're playing. So I've strategically planned my trip in France to be at certain stadiums. And so I'm a fan. Can
you give us some tips on that?
I'm pulling for the U.S. I think they have a tremendous chance to get through. I think they're in great form. I've seen them play recently out in L.A. I'll be at the game on Sunday next week. So that's my team. That will always be my team.
Last summer, my son had just finished kindergarten, and then it was all of a sudden summer, and he was like, "What is going on? You're watching TV all day. I've never even seen you watch TV before." I'm like, "Well, it's the World Cup, so there's a game at 9 and 12 and 3, and this is what we're doing." And I'm like, "Cooper, I'm so excited. Next summer, the Women's World Cup is in France." And with the most just confidence in the world, there's no Women's World Cup. And then after my heart sank, I'm like, well, why would he know that? I can't trust ABC to make sure he knows that there's a Women's World Cup. I can't trust these outlets to do this. I have to do it myself. So we're gonna go, and I'm gonna take Cooper and my niece, Ashlyn, and we have our whole little thing planned out. And he is the generation where it's normal. Kim's college players will leave their collegiate experience having had an experience with female leadership, and they're going to understand what that means when they go into the leadership of the workforce, and how to communicate and how to collaborate as a team. What is team chemistry? Like how do we work together to achieve this with all these different personalities who have to find a way to be motivated in their own unique style. So that's a real gift. It's also a gift to normalize the experience, because the more normal it is, right? So traditionally, we've often put women in these like no-win situations. And when I first heard Kim's getting the NYU job after, one day in the season, I'm like, well, that's another example of like setting somebody up to fail. But then the leadership of Kim, like no, I'm just gonna put out this fire and then I'm gonna do my job and change the whole culture of NYU. And like, no big deal, because that's just what I do. That's just how I work, and that's super powerful. And just to kind of close my Kim fangirl moment, it was 2012, and I was the head coach at the New York Athletic Club, and I had just had Cooper, and I was like, I'm gonna be like Foudy out there and her Bjorn, and like, you know, I've got a Dunkin' Donuts cup in this, I got the Bjorn, I got the coaching, got the soccer ball. It was so not like that. And Kim had agreed to like come and like help out, and every text I sent that said, there's no fucking way I'm gonna get to Travers Island in 30 minutes, never felt like Kim. She always had my back. She always was like, you just let that infant feed, you know, like, you just stay there and like change diaper, like just be in this role. I got you. And it never felt like it was competitive, adversarial. It felt so natural and normal. She went on to take the team to other national championships and put them in a more competitive position, because that's just what she does. And I'm super proud to know you. And I'm like, can I announce the Brooklyn thing? Can I announce the Brooklyn thing?
Let's open it to everybody. We can finish with that. Awesome. So we'd love to bring you all into the conversation. Questions for Kim or Courtney, things to discuss, points that we haven't hit. Yeah. All the way over there.
Thank you. The film showed briefly the some of the barriers with USSF for professional players to get into the course themselves. Do those barriers still exist? And with particularly with women's soccer, of how there is that gap between WSA and NWSL, have they tried to even discuss how there was a gap where women could not play professionally and could be ineligible to meet the criteria?
No.
And I'm not surprised.
Right next door.
My question is kind of related. It's more generic question, not only about football, but also about other sports. Like, why is there this requirement that you had to be a former player to coach? Like, I still dream of coaching the Red Sox, and I haven't never played baseball. I think I'm very competent.
I'm curious how you feel about that.
I'll be in the stands when you are, I promise.
But Kim, when you see that and you knew that there was no opportunity for that actually to even be true, right? To have the required number of years experience, because there was no access to it, and eventually that's going to go away. I mean, that will be a problem that's going to take care of itself.
The Soccer Federation has actually put up more challenges and more barriers to get coaching license. I would say that's across the board for men and for women. But to be specific, men who have certain criteria, like being a professional player, can skip certain licenses and be waived right in to start at a certain level, which would be B. I was able to do that when I got my B license because I was a former national team player, and they considered that a good enough criteria where they waived me right into the B. So now we have a women's professional league, and so that criteria can be met by a certain group of women now, but there are women who are older who went through this gap in the women's professional league, and just like Tracy, she had 2 years of professional playing experience and not 3. Well, that's sort of not her fault, right? And so it is that was definitely discouraging, and I would like to see our federation make it easier for people to get into coaching and to get their licensing. I think it's very important. I think it's a very important process, but it has become more difficult, unfortunately, right now.
I would say the waiver situation is like a gift for professional players. Like, I don't want to bother going to a gymnasium and learning with the moms and dads. I'm better than that. Can I have a waiver? And it was provided. it's not a guarantee that your playing experience equates to you're an amazing coach. I think that rule is silly, and I think all the professional players should sit in the gym just like everybody else and get the licensing like everybody else, so that they can kind of become humble and understand what it means to kind of come out of your world of specialness and into the world of, I don't care what your accomplishments are. I care about how you're connecting to this 6-year-old or this 16-year-old. There's a former U.S. national team player, Lori Kolupny. 100 caps, which means 100 times she played for the United States. She didn't even know about the waiver situation, and nobody even bothered to tell her. She couldn't go and do the coaching license in LA because she couldn't afford to stay at the Embassy Suites for 10 days in a row because it's a residential program.
That was my point about it.
That's like the invisible obstacle, right? You can't, somebody who has a family can't just go to a coaching license experience for 10 days. So you've already like written off a lot of the population just by structuring the license that way. So what a shame for Lori Kolupny to be in a position where she can't afford, after representing our country for so long and 100 games, to not have U.S. soccer like help her transition into another career as coach. Why wouldn't they want all the national team players to jump in? I would love to see, Abby Wambach and, Julie Foudy coaching in the NWSL. I don't want to not see these women anymore.
So it's that line of demarcation that your life starts. We have a question over here.
Sort of wanted to follow up on the line. I think that, while it's great if a great soccer player becomes a great coach, a lot of the great coaches were not good soccer players. Some people who won the World Cup were never known as soccer players. On the men's side, I imagine it could be the same thing in the women's side. And if you're looking for more coaches, why is it necessary that all the universities look for these licensing? What is the barrier, especially like Division 3 or lower? Why is there really truly a monopolistic situation where if you don't have the license you can't get the job?
Many of the jobs that I see advertised, whether it's in college coaching, professional coaching, or say you're seeking a director of coaching for a large youth program, they will say that the requirements are a certain level of license in order to be considered for the position. I don't know if that answers your question, but
the licensing required, so you can't, let's say you never played professionally, but you were a good college player, and you could be an excellent coach, but you never get a job. Is that the idea?
I wouldn't say you would never get a job, because I do think that there are jobs available that the people that are doing the employee would not be looking for an absolute that you have to be a licensed coach. Whenever I'm asked, and I'm mentoring my assistant coaches and my young coaches, I say to them, you need to start your coaching license path. Let's get the plan together for how you're going to get your license and what the path is going to be. I do think it's important. I think it shows somebody that you are a professional, that you're always seeking to get better, that you're willing to put yourself on the line. You're always doing professional development. And so that for that reason, I do think that there is value in getting your license and being qualified.
So all your assistant coaches are.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having this panel. I guess I had a question on their normalization and how do we raise boys so that they know how to engage with girls in sports? Because like in my experience, like they don't know, even like from like at a young age, they don't know how to act with a girl and when you're playing with them. And I think that translates growing up and to see this. And also, just like an adult level, just like we already have like all these men in position of power, and you can understand that they don't want to lose the power. So that's why they're not going to like open the doors for like all the women to go. And here, I'm going to give you the position of power so I can be under you. And so how we tackle that kind of loss aversion, and so that then we can have the switch. I don't know.
So busting down the systemic, institutionalized gender discrimination that continues to pervade yet is invisible.
But only in sports.
It's going to take a long time. The more panels like this, the more people who are asking the questions to, how do we take the macro of what we know in the institutions that do the research on how kids learn, how kids, all that. How do we take the macro and into the micro, right? And that's where you need the relationships with people on the ground, coaching, working with the kids every day, because it's the everyday integration of the messaging, right? And so when the messaging is switched, and then you invest in every day that message integrating into the culture, it's culture. We're trying to change culture, and how hard that is. What country are you from? The challenges of changing culture so that in the next World Cup, we see your country, because FIFA's like, we want to invest in you. We know that if Dominican Republic has a women's infrastructure program, that the global economy will be better.
I just wanted to just follow up on that because I've seen the film a couple of times now, but one thing that struck me when I viewed it today was when Tracy's partner in the licensee, when he spoke about Tracy being a brave girl coming to get her license, and he said, now she will go back and she will give her experience to all the girls out there. And that's the culture that we're in, is that he doesn't think that she could go back and give advice and coaching to boys. And I love telling my story. I will tell my story to anybody who asks me, because I know that I'm changing the culture just a little bit when they say, oh, wait a minute, she's a female coaching a male team. Wow, this is different. This is unusual. It makes people stop and think. So I'll go out and I'll talk to anybody, and I'll tell my story to anybody, because I know it just changes it just a little bit, just a little bit.
Are you the first female coach that most of your players have ever had?
I would say that's true.
Yeah.
I always say interview my players, because they'll give you the 411. And I've seen quotes in papers of my players. Nico was our former captain. He was a freshman. He just graduated as a senior. And he said, we did, when the reporter asked him about having a female coach, he said, we, meaning the team, we did a good job of keeping open minds. And I thought that was a very good quote.
If the game is one of the universals, that once you're talking tactics, right? You're talking tactics, no matter, going into the game. But can the same be said about the player-coach relationship? That a player-coach relationship is a player-coach relationship regardless of who the player is and who the coach is?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, there's no question. Coaching is getting a group of individuals who have their own agenda, their own needs, their own desires, and getting that group to move in the same direction. That's what coaching is.
I hope you all wrote that down.
I want to ask one thing about the players. And last year we got together and we were talking about what to expect in the Men's World Cup, and we all noted that there was not much of a conversation about the American team in the Men's World Cup, because it turns out they weren't in the tournament. And we bemoan the state of American soccer until Amy, 30 seconds in, said, "Can we just take a pause and remember that we do have the greatest soccer team, in the world on the women's side, and so the American soccer is not doing all that badly, actually, it's just part of it." So can you talk a little bit about the players' culture? And we have a crisis in coaching, but something's really working well on the player development side in the U.S., at least compared to other countries. And I wonder if either of you could speak to differences you see in the way that we're training, young men and young women. Is it that the differences have to do with other kinds of things, or are we doing something better coaching women than we're doing coaching men and boys?
I'm going to answer that first. I think the reason that we're so successful in the U.S. on the women's side, in sports in general, is because it is acceptable in this country for girls to play sports. And I was a young person in the 70s when we were right on the cusp of sort of the tipping point, because I was of that generation where I only played with the boys. People called me a tomboy, all of that. And then there was this massive wave of, okay, this is perfectly acceptable now for girls to be playing sports, whereas it was unusual when I was my daughter's age. And so now we raise daughters. From the time that they're 3 or 4, we put them in their little soccer outfit. They go out on Saturdays. They're doing the same things as boys are, participating in sports in this country. They're expected to be teammates. They're expected to do sports. They're expected to excel in sports. You can go down the line. So it's the culture of this country that helps us excel in the women's game.
I can't agree with you anymore. I also just think that I got so wrapped up in your response that I was like, wait, what was the question again? I actually don't remember what the question was.
Is there anything that we're doing? Is there anything that we're doing right, training girls and developing female athletes, that's helping to explain why we have so much success in this area in soccer, whereas we have so little success on the men's side? And as a sports psychologist, do you see something?
Yes, the motivation isn't monetized. Motivation is not monetized in women's sports. The sport and doing your best in it, because that's what your parents told you would set you apart from everybody else, is really the driver. There's nobody on the pitch going like, I'm so excited that so-and-so's coming to like maybe scout me today or whatever. It's not looking outside for an external reward. Let's combine it with that, because then you have the equality of, it's okay for me to want to go out and make money playing my sport, right? I don't always have to be subjected to this like role of I do it because I love it so much. I mean, I just want to marry the two in the future, and maybe on the men's side, kind of bring more of that like in the internal motivation into it, and where it's not monetized so much.
And I just want to jump a little bit more on that. Is the things that are happening also is we are having investment in women's sports. We are having coverage, maybe not enough TV coverage, but we are having coverage of women's national team, of women's sports in general. That did not exist when I was a kid. My daughter always wants to watch the women's national team play. So she knows she can look it up when they're playing, tape it if she needs to, and watch it. So that's making a big difference too.
Let me push a little bit back and ask, absolutely in terms of what Eric's saying, but as someone who has gotten a lot of hate mail for pointing out the women's record as opposed to the men's record, there's a hostility about it. I mean, can we talk about that? They might have a better record, but the game's not as competitive. The field isn't as deep. The game's not as global. There aren't as many teams. There's a whole lot of, but this is really why the women have a better record than the men. And I'm like deleting all of the profanity that usually accompanies all of those sorts of bullet points. So there is a good culture to encourage girls to get in there, and there is some support and there is some visibility, but sports is still a heavily male-dominated sphere. There are fewer opportunities in terms of professional, as you said. There's fewer opportunities. So the women's field is actually sort of a stronger athletic field because they're not getting siphoned off into professional leagues. But let's push back a little bit. There is still a lot of problematizing of the role of the female athlete in American culture. I mean, what do we say to just sort of acknowledge and work with that a little bit?
Boy, that's a big question.
It is, I don't know that there's an answer to it.
I don't know if there's an answer, or if I'm only a soccer coach, so I might not be qualified to answer that. It's also maybe soccer is becoming, and it will become, the number 1 sport in America. It's a sport of immigrants. There could be some backlash against that sport for just that reason. We're Americans, we play American football, not this other thing over here. And it is unfortunate to hear that we're not celebrating our incredibly successful women's national team.
I think again, you have to kind of look at where that feedback's coming from, right? And it being like the creation of it being adversarial to achieve whatever that person's end is, right? To keep things interesting. Like if the men's and women's national team were super supportive of each other, would it be as interesting? Like, I would hope so, I just don't like the adversarial nature of not wanting to be overshadowed by the women's national team. It's a problem, and the biggest problem is it's holding back the men's national team.
All right. I think that's a good place to stop. So join me in thanking this terrific panel for kicking us off.